right. Hello, everyone. Today we are here to have a conversation about psychedelic integration, the process of integrating psychedelic or entheogenic experiences such as ayahuasca or psilocybin mushrooms. And to start things off, I think we'll dive into something really fundamental, which is the question, what does integration mean? So what are some definitions of integration that come to mind for you guys?
Great question.
And there's rain and thunder in the background. We are basically in the rainforest in Costa Rica right after Apotheosis 4.0, so that's what the background noise is, and the cicadas. Yeah.
So for me, integration really is about the embodiment of the things that we've learned on our journeys. So bringing that knowledge, that experience, the things that we've touched really deeply inside of us, more into ourselves and into our lives, and therefore kind of being the experiences that we've had, and also embodying that almost the future self that we may have a glimpse of or an understanding of, bringing that forward, right? Bringing that more and more forward. So how do we do that? That's integration for me, really, in a nutshell. And how do we continue to stay connected to those experiences, the meaning that it's given us, and not forget, you know?
And I feel integration is kind of a multifaceted kind of thing. We need to take those experiences that we had, as Philippa just said, and integrate them into different areas of our life, the mind, the body, and the soul. And very often we think, okay, integration is just about taking that experience back into our daily lives, which it is. It's an important part. But it's integrating it into our physical bodies. Its integration involves the spiritual body, the emotional body. And this will allow us to support the whole process, because when we come out of these sometimes very intense processes, you know, especially if you're in an ayahuasca retreat or ceremony, you come out with all of this knowledge and all of this insight, and taking that and bringing it into some kind of groundedness is really important. You know, you've got to get some groundedness in that experience. Otherwise, it can keep you in this space of being kind of up in the air, and it can actually create confusion, and it can create a bit of disbalance. So grounding it in the physical body, grounding it in your emotional practice, grounding it in your spiritual practice is really one of the keys. It gets overlooked very often.
Yeah, I actually love this metaphor of like a snow globe of the psyche. You know, you come off of one of these retreats or big experiences, and you've gotten shaken up. Everything has come loose, and it's open to you, and it's falling down. And you know, you get to look at each aspect. You get to look at each snowflake and say, do I want this? Do I want to keep doing it? Because it can also be a process of letting go of things, right? And if you decide to let it go, you can let it fall to the ground, or you can, if it's something that's really valuable to you, you know, you can say yes, and then have the process of bringing that into you, right? Integrating it into your being.
Yeah, adding on to that, it's almost like after these experiences, everything's been shaken up. Your nervous system is almost like gelatinous, and things have been kind of blown apart, and you're going to recohere in some way, and you can recohere according to your old patterns and the gravitational pull of your old environment and patterns, and you could just kind of come back into the same shape you were before, or you have this opportunity to recohere kind of in a new shape according to all the wisdom and lessons that you downloaded basically with these psychedelic experiences. And you can basically, some of these psychedelics, especially ayahuasca, almost feel like they give you homework, and integration is partially a large part of it is doing the homework and actually actualizing these situations and these lessons that you saw in your mind, like creating that album or that blog or putting an altar in your home, things like this.
And this is why the integration is so important post experience, is because it's very easy to go back to your normal life, and you've got these same influences coming at you, these same thought patterns, you know, your same friends who are acting the same way, and it's very easy to slip back into that. So integration is what helps prevent you from doing that, to keep you in that space, that experience space, and and not allow it to slip back into that, because this happens quite a bit. This is a big problem in the psychedelic community, actually, I think, is that you've got shamans out there, you've got people leading ceremonies out there who, they give out the medicine, they're present during the ceremony, and then people leave, and it's just like, okay, see ya, have a good day. There's no tools given to people to integrate this stuff. And so they go home, and then 2 weeks later, after their high wears off, they're like, well, shit, I'm right back to where I was.
On the couch eating potato
On the couch eating potato chips, smoking weed, or doing whatever. My life is still as shitty as it was before. And then they go into this place of disappointment that all their problems weren't suddenly solved. And they think, why did I just go through those hours of puking my guts out during this ayahuasca ceremony? Or they think, wow, that was a fun trip on psilocybin, but what did I really get out of it? And all of that gets lost somehow. So integration is about not going back into those patterns, or when those experiences, or when those daily mundane things come back into your life, approaching them from a different perspective and seeing them, observing them, not necessarily blocking them out, because we can't do that. We live in this world. We have to go to work. We have jobs. We have relationships. So it's not necessarily about saying, I'm just going to avoid all that. It's about seeing it, feeling it, observing it from this place and this perspective of the medicine experience, rather than from your old perspective. And that gives you this whole new view, like this 1,000-yard view of that situation, and you can deal with it in a different way.
Yeah, that really leads nicely into the next kind of natural topic, which is what are some of our best tips for integration. And one of the first ones that came to mind for me while you were talking, Adam, was that when you go back, it is likely you do have to be gentle with yourself, because you do have to realize that you are in some ways very likely going to regress into old patterns to some extent. You're not just going to suddenly become superhuman, enlightened version of you who just doesn't do any of the old shit you used to do. You're going to be doing some of that old shit. You need to be gentle with yourself and realize this is part of the process, and it's kind of, the path is ever upward with frequent resting places, as it says in the Kabbalion, and also frequent detours and regressions and stuff. But you can take this new awareness into those old patterns, and you can suddenly bring them into the light of this awareness that sees the triggers underlying the toxic vice or habit, or seeing kind of the shadow side of the behavior, and just gaining this deeper awareness of where it's coming from. And in my experience, just bringing these things very deeply into the light of awareness begins to transmute them and shift them. And it may be some months before the pattern really changes, but just bringing into that more expansive awareness and putting it in a deeper context starts to loosen your attachment to it, and you start to see it in a different way from the perspective of the witness of your actions. So that's one I would mention.
I'd like to just almost take one step back for perhaps anybody that's listening or watching this now and that's considering a journey, and just explain a little bit about perhaps where the journey starts. And definitely the journey starts in the consideration and the preparation for doing something like this, right? In terms of the motivation and the intention, and just recognizing that there's a level of responsibility that comes with that. When we talk about doing the work, in the spiritual community or the self-development community, really we're talking about doing the inner work, right? So this is going to be a deep dive into ourselves, into our soul, into our psyche, perhaps some of the patterns that we are, unconscious of, unaware of, our shadow tendencies, some challenging things that we might have experienced in our life, and really the preparation being, such a core component and important consideration for anybody out there that's considering doing this, right? It's not for the faint of heart, should we put it that way, right?
The hero's journey.
The hero's journey. And then, in a sense, you get out what you put in, right? So you do the prep, and hopefully you'll be rewarded with the treasure during the experience itself, right? The deep dive, the being open, the being prepared, and the being willing to dive in and let go. Right, and that's part of the experience itself, and then really after that, the integration of whatever we've learned, right, which is often ineffable. It's beyond words. It's sometimes very mystical, and sometimes it's very personal. We just have a knowing or a knowledge of what now needs to happen. So I think it's important for anybody that's listening to recognize that actually often the integration really is the really important part of the journey.
Yeah.
It's kind of like it's the step on the road continuing, right, of our life, of what we then want to create with, again, this level of responsibility of now we get to choose. And sometimes in that choice, as Eric was saying, sometimes that choice is about letting things go, right? And our human self, our ego, our attachments might be really attached, right? That might be really difficult. So I think it's important just to flag that in addition to creating these amazing things that we might want to bring to the table and bring to our life, there is also an element of letting go, you know, of cutting away the things that don't serve us, right, for the highest good of ourselves and for the higher good of all. So I just wanted to kind of add that in there as a prep, maybe, for anybody that's sitting here listening going, oh wow, this sounds so great. And it's very powerful work, you know, in this field. And it needs to be taken with that honour and respect and sacredness. And some levity too, because we can all get very, you know, myself included, attached to the importance and the seriousness of what we're doing. But
well, picking up on this idea of letting things go, this often comes up in ceremonies where, you know, you suddenly make a realization that, wow, I hate my job, I need to quit it, or I don't like my partner, I need to break up with them. A lot of shifts can happen, and sometimes people come out of a ceremony and they make a rash decision and they do let go too quickly.
Absolutely.
Right? And so part of integration is also taking a step back and allowing the process to unfold, because processing is one of the most important parts of integration. Right? You have to give yourself time for all of those experiences to start to weave into your energy system, into your conscious mind, and for you to make sense of it. You can have a super powerful vision that says suddenly, you know, I need to quit my very stable job, leave my family, become a monk, and sit on top of a mountain. This can be a profound experience, but is it really serving your highest good? Not always. It can be a metaphor for something else. And so an important part of the integration process is allowing that processing to happen, being aware of all those things and trying to kind of make sense of all those little experiences that came up, and then making an informed decision afterwards. Not an informed decision from your mind, which is what we often do, is from a rationality place, but from this new perspective that you gain, and looking at all the things that happened during that process or ceremony, or whatever it happens to be, and then following your heart in the end. And sometimes it is about making those drastic steps and letting go, because how often in our lives do we know deep inside of us, I should not be with this person, it's toxic, it's not good for me, or I've always wanted to be a painter, or I've always wanted to do this with my career. And fear is normally what holds us back. And the psychedelic experience can often break through those fears and show us the truth and show us the light. Sometimes you release those fears and it allows you to take that big step. Sometimes there's more processing that has to happen. But giving it time is a very important part to integration, so you don't make rash decisions.
Yeah, building on that monk example that you use, I think something really important is precision, like getting really precise on what it is that you want to come from this. You know, for that individual who quits and goes to Tibet to be a monk, maybe if they let it process, all that would surface is, I need some time for myself regularly.
Exactly, yeah.
Right? And that could be, okay, so then what will I do? Oh, I will start a dedicated meditation practice. Or when I wake up, I will have 30 minutes before I do anything else. So, like, if you let it surface and you just dug into it a bit more, actually much smaller, more tangible, like, rituals or daily steps can surface, rather than these big, vague ideas of, oh, I need to be a peaceful monk, or I need to embody love. It's like, okay, that's a fantastic insight, but what does that look like in your life, and what steps can you take to actually get there? So a lot of it is just precision.
And while Philippa was talking earlier about, it made me think of how without integration, a psychedelic experience can be just a peak experience, like viewing the top of the mountain, but then you go back and you just keep living in the same reality you were living in before. But you were saying how it can really just be the beginning. It can either be just this glorious peak experience and you go back to the same, or it can be this glorious peak experience that opened up the door to living in an entirely new reality, or a new reality tunnel, basically. It makes this possible. But in order to do this, you really do have to pay careful attention to the fact that anywhere you go, any environment you're in, any people you're around, there's a certain gravity from those triggers trying to pull you into a certain reality. And when you go back home, the gravity is trying to pull you back into exactly the patterns that you were enacting before. So one of the best tips that I have for integration is to really do whatever you can to be extremely deliberate about optimizing your environment and your social circle for the kind of reality you want to live in and the kind of lifestyle you want to have. And this may mean deciding, oh, I don't want to live in the city center anymore. I want to move to the outskirts and live closer to nature. Or, oh, I really need to stop hanging with this crowd that's doing like too much ketamine all the time and going to these punk shows and like punching people in the face or something. Or like, I really need to put an altar in my living space, get rid of all the shit I don't need, and start treating my living space actually like a sanctuary. You starting to make those changes can really then have an effect on the quality of your conscious experience that you can carry forward for the rest of your life.
There's almost this like small shadow side to the spiritual community of like this aversion to deep work or like hard work. Like it's not going to be an easy process. Some of these decisions are really difficult, and you know, often some of us can come to ceremony expecting this immense insightful download that will just solve everything, but really it's quite likely that the answer or the change you need is just a little bit of discipline, a little bit of willingness to lean in and just do hard work regularly over time, instead of just waiting for this, the universe will provide for me, right? Just show up for your own life every day, and it just all builds on itself.
And that's why, going also with what Philippa was saying earlier and what Jordan was saying, it ties in very nicely. You know, the ceremony or the experience, this peak experience, is just the beginning, right? Where the real work happens is doing something regularly to maintain that. Because again, if you just go straight back into your old life, you lose the magic, right? And if you have a constant practice, bring more and more awareness and more mindfulness practices into your life, whether it's meditation or yoga, or I really like the idea of having an altar in your house, which is what I have also. And every time I even pass by it, maybe I don't have time to meditate that day, but when I walk past my altar, it reminds me of my divinity and my spirituality, and that I need to be mindful of my path. And there are these very simple, small things you can do to stay in that space, you know. And what you said about being in the right community is so important. Finding like-minded individuals who can support you on that path, and they're on the same wavelength, who aren't going to tear you down. People that you can practice radical honesty with. People who you can be open and speak from a place of the heart. Because I think one of the first things that happens, and this goes into social integration, you know, when you come back from an experience like this and you're excited and you want to tell everybody about this, and very often what happens is the first thing you get is, oh yeah, so you had a drug experience. Oh, great, right? And that has the power to just diminish everything that you just experienced. And then you start to question yourself and you doubt yourself about this. So you have to be very careful about who you talk about your experience with. Pick and choose those people. Find people in your community who will support you in that path. This is what's so beautiful about the high existence community, because everybody are on kind of the same wavelength, and you can reach out to those people. The Apotheosis groups, you know, this tribe that we have, this very strong tribe feeling that we have is beautiful. One of the biggest things that people take away from the Apotheosis retreats is that they have found their tribe. And many people come in on the first day, and in the sharing session, they talk about how they feel kind of lonely and isolated because they have no one to talk about these things with. And now they feel like, I found my tribe. So I would encourage anybody out there to become part of a community. Find people out there that you can do this with, and realize when you come back from a psychedelic experience that not everybody has been there. There is this ineffable experience that you can't put into words, so you can't even explain it to people. You're going to have the doubters. You're going to have the people that call it a drug experience. You're going to have the people that may be hurt by what you're saying, especially if you're talking to a loved one and you suddenly have this ripped open heart, and everything is pouring out of you. This honesty that comes out of you can be too much for people sometimes. So it's important to also kind of get permission from people to share your experiences, and instead of talking about your experience like a story, talking about, oh, I saw these aliens and I was here and there, talk about what it did for you. Talk about what your emotion was around it. That's really important.
Yeah, and leading on from that, something I think is really important is you don't owe anybody your story. You don't owe anybody your experience. When you start getting into the realm of storytelling, often these experiences lose their sentiment. They lose the deep connection, the magic that they have given you, because you're now just kind of going over words. It's not the emotional connection and resonance that you had in the moment. And for that reason, you don't owe anybody your story. Perhaps people aren't ready to hear yet. So the discernment about who is ready and who is not, trust yourself that you will know. You will know that. You can sense into where people are at. And if it doesn't feel appropriate, or it feels like, that there may be a shutting down that you get, that person is not ready, then use your discernment, and maybe another time, maybe I'm not feeling ready to share at the moment. And also you don't necessarily have to explain the full detail of the experience, and how it was and how it came to pass, it could well have been a similar experience. And this, from my breathwork background, is some of these experiences can be generated without the use of psychedelics, right? So deep states of meditation, visions, ideas, awareness, this doesn't just have to come through this particular channel. There are many ways to the top of the mountain, right, so to speak. And that, I think, the more work I do in this field is also evident to me that some of these tools really help catalyze that process, right? And being able to really thin the veil between the conscious and the subconscious mind, and what we may need to be aware of, what we may need to process in order to be our biggest, best selves. But there are other ways to achieve that state. So for me, I think one of the biggest tips around integration is self-care, and finding the time and the space to really keep in touch with you, right? Yeah. To really stay in this place of centeredness, of groundedness, with yourself, with your emotions, with your desires, right? And your connection to something greater. Because that, for me, is where we're looking to come back to anyway with these experiences, right? We're not doing these journeys to go find something out there, right? Even though sometimes that may be the perception. And what often they mirror back to us is, hey, guess what? This is already in here, right? You already have this down. And it's about finding the space and time and the practices that serve you to stay connected with that energy and with that connection. And from there, life is going to flow. From there, you're going to get the information and the messages. And so whether that's meditation, and we can talk about more of these maybe in a little bit more detail, but, meditation, yoga, physical practice, walking in nature, the list goes on. Whatever works for you. And we've spoken about this before, is like, what brings you joy? What brings you into a good place? Because otherwise these just become lip service, right? This so-and-so, this top high-end performer has this X, Y, and Z practice. I should do that because then I'll make millions. Well, that might work for them. And you might try it and you might be like, oh, this is heavy, this is horrible, but I'm doing it, And I think that's the key, is really finding practices and ways to stay connected with you. Because your path, and this is what I found for me, my own personal journey with like purpose, for example, is your path isn't necessarily going to come down and be presented to you, right? And I'm sure you guys share the sentiment. It's like a little bit like driving along. Sometimes you get very, very clear visions, right? Sometimes you get very clear information. But often it's like driving along in the fog, right? With the headlamps on. And you can just see the little bit in front of you, right? And you're driving the car, and then the next thing. So the path will unfold, right? It's these kind of stepping stones, and I go over here and I take this action, and then the doors open again, and now I have another choice to make and another direction to go from that, of these infinite possibilities. But that for me would be another thing around, if something around your purpose or your, you know, why you're here on earth, for example, is coming up for you in your experience, just accept and be okay with the fact that this is an unraveling and an unfolding, rather than having very, very clear answers. Because when we have those types of expectations, often we're cutting ourselves off. And the same with expectations of an experience or a journey. We're cutting off what the universe or divinity may have for us and to show us, rather than what is based on our perhaps smaller, limited agenda, right? Or what our ego would like to see or know. So there's a couple of things that I just wanted to put in there.
It reminds me of that Joseph Campbell quote where he says, if you can see your path clearly laid out before you, it's probably not your path.
Right.
Another thing that came up while you were talking was to be careful about the story you construct for yourself about your experience as well, because it's not just telling others, but when you reduce these unspeakable experiences into language, you can actually not even realize the extent to which you're reducing the experience in your mind and putting it in a box, and suddenly months later you're just telling yourself, oh yeah, there was that time where I kind of talked to this like scorpion looking thing, and it told me I needed to become a poet or something, but yeah, I guess that was kind of wild, and you've compressed it down into these linguistic symbols that cannot contain the full force of your experience. You know, maybe your actual experience was like, you know, I drank this literal magic potion, and I was like almost sucked out of my body and had an out-of-body experience of drifting through this ethereal, transpersonal, transdimensional realm, and I came into contact with these ethereal spiritual beings and had this download of insight about myself and my identity. You can use more poetic language to somewhat capture the expansive, unspeakable nature of your experience. And so if you do write about your experience or create anything from your experience, it's good to try to be as detailed as possible and try to create something that does some justice to the expansive nature of the experience, recognizing that you can't reduce it to an artifact. So that's just something to be aware of as well.
Yeah, amazing you brought that up, because I want to really underscore this point, is that so much of these experiences are mythological or metaphorical, right? So re-articulating the story just in what happened doesn't actually totally capture it, right? Thinking in terms of how it made you feel and maybe trying to distill an insight out of that, those can actually serve as like orienting metrics or giving you directions. Just the story itself is, again, really just a story. It won't guide you many places or help you like cut down decisions, but if you can move in the direction of how you feel, or like what would the answer to this insight look like, then you now have a path unfolding in front of you.
And this is where the processing part is so important,
yes,
right? Because you have that initial vision, and to make sense of it, you need that time. And one really good tool, and I'm glad you brought this up about language, one really good tool is journaling, to write about your experience, but write from a place of feeling, yes, and not from a place of recitation of every little detail that happened. Yeah, and then I met this alien and he told me to get into this rocket ship and go here, blah, blah, blah. But simply how you were feeling by meeting that particular being or that spirit guide or whatever. And then the more you write about it, things will magically start to come clear because you've embodied it into your emotions. Yeah. And then magically things will start to unfold as to where that's coming from and what the spirit was really trying to tell you. So journaling is a good tool for integration, an excellent tool for integration. It's working through language, but that language needs to be needs to come from the place of emotion, from the heart, rather than from here.
Yeah, that's really great. I would also say on journaling, which is a really good tool for life, aside
general,
from
yeah.
integration,
Yeah.
is that you can recreate your experience. So, for example, you can set the intention to go back into that space, right? To go back into your experience and journal from that place. And when you do that, it can be a really powerful practice to write as if the experience is happening now. So as if you're in it in this very moment and you're writing in the present tense. So perhaps it could be, I'm entering the ceremonial room, or I'm, whatever the thing that's happening right now is, and I'm feeling this sensation in my body, and it's, making me feel elated and expansive. There may be colours, there may be smells, as many of the descriptive aspects of that experience that you can capture, particularly while it's fresh in your memory after an experience, can then help that integrate in some way in your system. But also, if you are to go back to that entry, it brings it alive again. Because the way that you're speaking to your subconscious mind is, it's happening now.
Right.
I am doing this, I am doing that. So it brings this very much alive quality to what was, right? It was written in the past, was maybe weeks, if not months ago, but can bring you back in that moment. The same with smells, and the same with music, for example. Certain sounds, certain music that perhaps was from your ceremony, or that really connects you to this I say ethereal or very deep space. Other ways that you can enhance your journaling practice, and also just asking yourself the questions like, what did this mean? Because often these are, as you say, we're talking in archetypal language, we're talking transpersonal, and we're talking symbology. So the literal visions or things that we see or experience aren't necessarily what we're meant to do, right? Go and live on the mountain in Tibet. It could well be cultivating that space. So sometimes the things that come up as clear indicators do need this processing time, right? Just to start perhaps unpicking and sitting with what that means. And if you do, again, ask your psyche, ask your subconscious, what does this symbology mean? You will probably get some greater clues, and then you can go deeper into it.
And one of the things you mentioned, I think, is one of the best tools for getting there, which is music. And most ceremonies are integrating music now. It's an amazing experience to take a playlist that you had during your ceremony and sit and listen to it in meditation without taking any medicine, and go back to that place that you were at, because you'll find that those triggers and those connections are still there, and that can make it fresh in your memory again. So use of music is a really good tool.
I felt it would be useful as well to give some examples of a type of feeling that you might take with you, because I had my first ayahuasca experiences about a year ago, and I wrote about my visions in vivid detail, and some of them are amazing, and I had some downloads of insight and wisdom that's really valuable to me. But I do think that some of the most valuable things I've carried forward have basically been this memory of these deep, just undeniable feelings. And one of those feelings was this overwhelming, deep sense that it's okay to trust the universe, that it's okay to trust reality, trust being. Just, it's okay to let go and let God, basically. Let go and let flow and just trust. And that gave me such a deep sense of peace that on the deepest level, everything is always okay with a capital O. That's something that I've carried forward and integrated much more deeply than I ever have before. And I can say that one feeling has changed my life from that experience. Another one would be experience of unconditional love and compassion. This experience of just, in the ayahuasca visions, any person that came to mind, how I was just able to just feel that person's life world and just feel the weight of their humanness and their suffering, and just see how we're all carrying so much all the time, and why would you ever want to make it harder for someone, and just the power of unconditional love, compassion, and kindness, that as well. And then some of the lightness too, some of the moments of just like uncontrollable laughter for minutes straight, just at the great like cosmic joke of being itself, and just gaining this sense of, this is like like there's a great saying like, don't trust a shaman who can't laugh during ceremony. It's like, I wouldn't believe in a god who didn't love to laugh and dance, basically. Like the gods, the spirits, the forces, whatever you want to call them, like this cosmos has a sense of humor, and laughter is one of our most powerful medicines available in every moment for tapping into that lightness.
Yeah, one of the feelings that continually comes up for me in this is this deep gratitude for my body. Like the fact that it just did this for me, and it's done everything in my life for me, and it asks for so little, always surfaces. And that can, again, it's a feeling that can guide you to a number of things. It can guide you towards stillness, it can guide you towards the outdoors, guide you towards nutrition, right? Like we're such mental creatures, we often stay in our head too much, but the reality is we are embodied beings, and you know, it asks so little of us. It just asks for a few seconds each day for a little self-care, for a little maintenance, for a little silence and stillness. And that always comes up as a lesson.
And I just want to come back to that word that we started with, almost, of embodiment. And I think that is so spot on, that the West, well, I think generally speaking, with technology, with smartphones, with computers, you know, everything is so interconnected, and we are kind of sucked into this other reality, right, of screens, and we do become disembodied, you know, because we live in our heads much of the time. And sometimes in workshops I talk about, you know, how do you ever feel your body is taking your head from A to B, right? It's just the body is the vehicle to carry the head around, right? And many people say, yeah. And this is really, for me, what the embodiment is also about. It's like this experience that you might have, which may be visions, it may be emotional, it may be physical, right? It may be all of these things or none of them. You might be stuck in thought loops, right? With your own mind, having this really fun experience. It's not so fun. It can be all of these different textures and flavors, right? And every single time is different. In the same way that when I do breathwork, every single time is different. But bringing that knowledge, understanding, wisdom, information that you conceptually grasp at some level, right, in here, and bringing that down in here. And that's the embodiment for me, is like the I don't know even how to describe it, but bringing that wisdom from the intellect into the physical, into the very cells of our being, right, and living and breathing it. So a lot of the exercises that we talk about, like journaling, for example, I feel also need to be balanced. You know, the cognitive awareness, the understanding, also needs to be balanced with, what does this mean physically? So so like connecting in with, what does that mean physically? So that might be, I'm a lot more sensitive emotionally. That was one thing that came up for me when you were just explaining the feelings that you had coming away from your experience, is we need to be aware and recognize that we might be a lot more sensitive, right, than we were before. One of my colleagues uses the phrase, you know, emotionally constipated, before an experience, and some of us are, right? Very few of us in the West are comfortable with emotions and emoting in front of other people and really sharing our feelings. So sometimes this can open a floodgate to a whole host of sensations that are happening in the body, because feeling happens in the body, but this might be a completely new experience. So then we might be into the world in quite a sensitive space. You know, we leave a retreat, for example, and a day or so later we're in the airport with all these people and energy and beings and lights and sounds, right? And we're very much open and sensitive, and that can feel very overwhelming. So in that case, like, you know, finding the earth, coming back to the body, changing our environment, giving ourselves the space can be really powerful. But that's just one aspect of the physical experience that might present itself, right? So that in itself is a journey to understanding, what do these new sensations mean? What interpretation almost, and this has been part of my journey, interpretation of these signals, and what do they mean in my system, right? Because they weren't necessarily here before. I wasn't as attuned to them as I am now. So that's a whole journey in itself. And what I would say, physically that might look like, food. My system is now more sensitive. I'm maybe able to discern more what my body really needs nutritionally, right? Good, clean, healthy food, for example. It might be I definitely need to be physically in nature, even just walking. I need to do some yoga and asana practice, for example. Or I need to lift some heavy weights, like what I think actually, or dance. Or dance, or dance, or all of these things that start bringing that down from here to here, right? Because we're also not just connecting. This is what came to me earlier. It's like we're not just connecting, the mind to spirit. This seems to be the way sometimes with meditation practice. We're connecting here, and really what we're also doing is, connecting body to spirit. Because body has its own intelligence, right?
Yeah, something I tell my yoga students is that your body is the temple for your soul. And the body is the container for your soul. And we have to create a safe, healthy, comfortable place for our soul to live. We've been gifted with these human bodies to carry our soul around. It's an amazing experience to be embodied as a human. And it's very easy after a psychedelic experience to suddenly say like, shit, I don't want to even be in this body anymore. And you kind of float off like this, right? But the fact is that we are on this planet. We have things that we have to accomplish, things we have to do, people we have to serve, whether it's your family or your job or whatever. And body integration, as Philip was just talking about, is just as important. It's an extremely important part of this process. And one way we can do that is simply having more mindfulness practices for our body. And self-care things like, even if you're just, taking a bath every once in a while, I think diet is a very important part. Feeding yourself with really good, if you can, organic food. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to become a vegan or anything like that, That's going to an extreme, but just feeling into your body to what it really wants to eat. How often do you eat things simply because it is, put in front of you? This is an excellent mindfulness practice that I started doing after one of my first ayahuasca practices, was when I look at a menu, feeling into each thing that I read. And then I can tell which one my eyes want to eat and which one my body wants to eat. Two totally different things very often. My eyes were saying, I want that hamburger with those french fries and, the chicken wings. My body's saying, I'd rather like to get that salad, Salad may be less interesting at that moment, but what's going to be better to feed my soul? And that becomes a habit over time with everything in your life. If you start to really listen to what your body needs, because there is a certain intelligence also in your physical body that we often don't listen to.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was just going to say, that your body truly has an extraordinary intelligence. It's a vast, deep intelligence that is constantly processing such a huge amount of data that you're not even aware of. And it's a sensory apparatus of enormous precision that can give you so much insight when you start listening to it. This has really been a revelation in the last year for me. I mean, it's been a progression, but particularly in the last year, it's just been like, oh my God, my body is constantly trying to send me messages, and I really haven't been listening for most of my life. And now I'm listening to my body, and there's just, every emotion that you experience tends to have a counterpart in the body. So you can actually just check in with your body to really know how you're truly feeling right now. Like if there's tightness in the chest, maybe it's anxiety. If there's nausea, maybe it's some resentment or anger or grief or something. You can feel these things in your body. And a great practice is just a type of meditation that Eckhart Tolle recommends, which is just inner awareness of the body, but almost transcending, thinking, conceptualizing of the body as a body, and instead closing your eyes and experiencing your entire body as a kind of energy field charged with aliveness, and just kind of attempting to tap into that energy field and just feel this amorphous blob of energy that is you at any given time, and feeling into that, you can just feel how it's kind of circulating, and where there's maybe some perturbation or disturbance or some kind of signal coming through, and feeling into that is really a great way to begin to embody more of the wisdom that you've downloaded from these experiences. And it's also just a great portal into the now, so you can spend less time wrapped up in the past and future, which is truly like a pathological disease afflicting us in the modern Western world, because we've put the mind on this enormous pedestal, the monkey mind, but so much of what the monkey mind wants to do is actually not serving us at all. It wants to dwell in the past for 8 hours a day, or it wants to project into the future and worry about it for 6 hours a day, and it's like, this is actually just driving us crazy and torturing us. Come back to the now.
And this is also how we start to break through the patterns of expectation from others. For example, how many decisions do you make based on what you think others want you to do and not what you really feel like you should do? This is a practice that I started actually fairly recently, was trying to make every decision in my life in flow. And when I say to make it in flow, I try to feel what's happening in my physical body when I'm faced with a particular decision. And I realized that I was making a lot of decisions in my life based on what other people wanted me to do in a way, or what expectations of others were, or my conditioning from previous things that had nothing to do with what was really serving my highest purpose. And a perfect example is, recently I was presented with a business opportunity to open a yoga studio. And I thought, from the mind, that's great. And I started working on this and worked on it. And at some point, it didn't feel in flow anymore, because it wasn't in line with my desire to live a very free life and not be tied down to anything. Previously, I would have stayed with it and committed to it because I told my investors I was going to be involved in this kind of thing. And I would have created a tremendous amount of stress for myself, right? But I thought, okay, no, I really need to feel into this. And I felt a little constriction in my chest whenever I thought about this project. And at some point I thought, you know what, this is not good for me. This is going to create even more constriction and stress for me in the years to come. So now is the time to make that very difficult decision to say, no, I don't want to do this. And to express that very honestly with my investors and the people who are involved in this. And the reaction that I got was super positive. They were like, hey, thank you for being in flow and telling us that. And they were on the same level somehow, in the same wavelength. And it was just a confirmation for me that is how I need to live my life. I need to feel in with every decision that I make and not care about what other people necessarily think. You have to be mindful of people and their feelings, maybe conscientious, of course. You don't want to sign a contract and back out at the last second and cause a lot of issues. If you commit to something, try to make that step of feeling into it before you make that big commitment.
So your embodied intuition in that situation may have spared you years of suffering that would have happened if you had only made the decision from a place of ego. So that's the power of beginning to unlock this vast embodied intelligence.
And just to add something before, I know Eric's had his hand there for a while, but just on that as a tool, like how do I check in with my intuition? How do I feel that in my body? What's my yes and no? Right, that's again something you can ask your body. For me, often, and I think this goes for a lot of people, the feeling of yes is an uplifting, expanding, hell yes kind of feeling, right? It might come a little bit from here, but if it's not accompanied by something happening in the body, generally it's the ego, right? Coming up with the idea. Or as if it's, it's a contracting, maybe heavier sensation and a pulling downwards, then maybe it's a no. And those are just some examples. So it might show up for you differently in your body, but I think that's a really powerful practice of checking in with yourself and identifying what's your yes and what's your no. And then the more practice you have with that, the more you can trust it to lead you in the right direction, as you've done, and saving yourself a lot of heartache. And I think that's one thing that modern society, we're conditioned in a way that we're very detached from that sense. Right, so there's an invitation there really to step into what is my yes and no.
And realizing that yes and no can change over time.
Right.
So you have to do this constant checking in, because
absolutely.
For me, in the beginning, it was a yes, but over time, it became a no. So you have to constantly do this practice to check in with yourself, because that can change.
Yeah.
And a really good heuristic is if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. And it's maybe not always applicable, but a lot of the time, that's a really good one to think about.
That's true.
I'd really compel people to rewind and listen to all of that again and let that really sink in. That really can't be underscored enough.
Yeah.
There's a line I like, which is, the expectations of others were the bars I used to build my cage, because you will be trapped forever if you do that. Seriously.
Yeah.
One thing I feel like compelled to bring into the space is the idea of timelines for this. I've certainly had it, and I've heard it from others, where it's like, oh, you just dropped body, mind, soul, social integration tips, and if I haven't done it in a month after my experience, or 3 months, I failed. The test is over, and I'll just give up on it. And honestly, it can take much longer, and I've found, for at least for me, that you'll be tested on kind of each insight one by one, and you have to do that first one before the second one even appears. So if something continues to come up, right, the lesson is repeating, focus on that, and then the next will come. And this can be 6 months down the line that you get a challenge from your ceremony, right? Or it can be a year down the line where you've finally seen this friend again, and they're now triggering you, and it's like, oh, you wanted to embody unconditional love. Okay, here you go. Now your test comes up. It's not this like 2-week window where everything has to happen. It's
Sometimes it does.
Sometimes it does. That's
yeah,
true.
you can be tested in the airport. You can be tested on the way to the airport the next day. But some come down the road, and you just need to be open to that.
To pick up on that, I think that's a really, really good point. There is no, there's no end destination as far as I see with this, and you can take it as wide and as deep as you want, right? And you can take as much time as you need. But there are some timelines that are important to bear in mind, in the sense of immediately after this kind of experience, you have a window, maybe 2 to 4 weeks, of higher neuroplasticity, right? So your mind is in a very open state, which is very easy to reprogram. So for that reason, if there are habits, if there are addictions, if there are things that are not serving you in your life that you feel is now the time to disconnect from and discontinue, then this is the perfect opportunity to do so, right? So that is definitely that is, this immediate period, even though we'd suggest, sitting on things and working out, if there's a major life decision, giving it a bit of space and time to come from a centered, grounded place. There are certain things that if you're going to kick them, because it will be so much easier to rewire your system after an experience than further down the line.
And alternately, because you're so vulnerable and open in that place, and your neuroplasticity is so available there, if you feed the same old shit back in there, it can even strengthen it even more. So that's why it's important to really be very careful.
Yeah,
what you're doing.
it's almost like the analogy, and some of my other colleagues use this, of fresh snow on the mountain. At one point there are all these skiers that have come down the slope, and then the snow comes and dumps this whole fresh load of powder, right? So you have this opportunity to carve new lines, right? To create new thought patterns and behavioral patterns. And you wouldn't want to go and carve those same lines that you've been trying to get out of, because they're kind of like a rut, right? If we've got the opportunity to get out of that rut and create a new path over here, then why wouldn't we do it, right? Otherwise we're sabotaging ourselves and our potential. So that's definitely something that's available in the first month or so, and then extending beyond that. You often experience this discomfort of, this isn't what I want, but I'm not able to bring what I want into my reality, right? Sometimes you have this one of my colleagues calls the bridging of worlds. It's like I know I don't want this thing, but I'm not ready yet, or I'm not in a position yet where I can create this new thing. And so it's this, for me, I find like it's like this pendulation of going backwards and forwards between these two zones, in a way, what we maybe don't want and what we do want, and until we find this position of stickiness, maybe, or of this embodiment of what we're now creating, and step at a time. That doesn't all have to come in one go, but it can take, as you say, it can take weeks, months, years, if not lifetimes. I know one of my lessons will be a lifetime, you know, about free will and about creation. So it's not just, oh yeah, I got the message, thank you very much. I got the message, but you know, how I show up and how I implement that in my day-to-day life requires a hell of a lot of focus and direction and clarity, you know, and that's, being a human, quite challenging to maintain.
Yes, and this general upward spiraling path of the evolution of consciousness and spirituality and self-actualization, it really is a lifelong process that never ends, unless perhaps you become the Buddha or something like this, but I wouldn't bank on that. So really it's good to think about when you have these powerful awakening experiences that awaken something in you, it's thrusting you forward on this path, and it's good to settle in for the long haul journey, really, and not think of there as being any destination, and just appreciate these different cycles that gradually lead you upward, and appreciate the intermittent resting places and regressions, and realize this is all part of this journey. And also on the topic of timelines, I would say when it comes to creativity, if you get any kind of major vision or insight about something you want to create, this is something to act on very quickly. You might want to take a week or something, or you know, don't quit your job to create it, but start it as soon as you can. Almost, there's a great couplet from Goethe where he says, "Whatever you can do or dream you can do, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it." And I've found that that's extraordinarily true in my life. Basically, starting something is half the battle of manifesting the larger reality and vision of that thing. As soon as you start putting it out into reality and you take that courageous first step, the universe takes a step towards you, and then you start getting feedback from other people and just from how you feel once it's out in the world. This is really important. You start seeing it differently, the vision expands, and then you can begin to iterate and improve on it. And then it just starts to crystallize and expand, and suddenly you're off and running with this creation. But that can only happen if you launch into it and take that first step, which so many people are so hesitant to do because of fear. Just say, fuck the expectations, I'm going to fucking start the podcast, I'm going to start writing the book, I'm going to start painting the mosaic, whatever the fuck it is.
Yeah, and oftentimes it doesn't need to be this huge step, you know, towards you know, becoming a rock star or whatever, but taking the small things that you can practically take in your life, right? Yeah. One thing that comes up very often that after ceremonies, especially in the coachings that I've done post-ceremony, is that people are often filled with this general sense that they need to do something more for the world in general. They need to give their talents, their gifts, their love. They need to help others. I've heard that time and time again, and they're kind of frustrated in how to do that. You know, I was talking with a guy recently who went through a psilocybin ceremony. He's a lawyer, you know, and he's like, I live in a little town in Ireland. What am I supposed to do? You know, how can I contribute somehow? How I want to inform people about this path, but the people in my, you know, my community are all lawyers, and they're all very conservative, and they're this, and so we worked a lot through, you know, how he could somehow find small ways to contribute to that. And for example, this one where what we come up with was he was the president of the local bar association, and you know, once a month or once every couple of months, they would come together and they would play cards, or they would go do some kind of sporting activity or have a barbecue or whatever. And it was an opportunity for him to maybe have a talk about, you know, spirituality in a way. And of course, you have to sort of tailor it to that particular community. Maybe not all these people would be open to that, but looking for small ways that you can express what your gifts are and this passion that you have that's practical is a good way to start it. And like you said, if you take that one little step and you tell the universe, I got your message, I'm taking a baby step, then that energy will start to come and more opportunities will open itself. So it's not about necessarily going to India and working in an orphanage. You know, it is looking for those small opportunities in your local community.
Yeah. That reminds me of art, making art for the sake of art. And, you know, that, you know, this energy, this life force energy that we all are tapped into, right? wants to come through us, and it wants to create, right? And so if we don't take the action, it's like we're keeping the tap closed, right? So we need to, if our sign is open the tap and let some of this stuff out, whether it's singing, whether it's poetry, whether it's writing, whether it's showing up and teaching yoga, whatever it is, whatever that contribution is, whatever the nudge you've been given is, the invitation is to take that, because and that tap, even if it's just a little drip right now, you're taking the first few steps to opening up that kind of creative sense. Don't think about what's going to come from it. Just be in the moment with what's coming through, right? Even if, and there's somebody that is kind of a teacher to me, it's like, even if nobody sees it, even if one person sees it, right? I've done my work in the world. This energy that wants to perpetuate life, right? And creation is out there, right? And she says, that's her job. That's her job, to be this vessel for whatever wants to come through. And I think we're so caught up in our heads, I use this analogy of, you cut your hand, you don't think about your body, telling your body how to heal it, right? Your body just does this thing. So we get so kind of in our heads about we know how to do everything and we know how to run our body, right? Often the opposite is true. And also in our heads about what do other people think of us? Well, if I do this and it fails, then what does that mean about me, right? Rather than just doing for the pure joy of doing, right? And something is going to come from that. Somebody is going to take some inspiration, some strength, some courage, some knowledge, right? Just from, even if it's a few words or a few lines, or it might even be just, a hand on the shoulder. We were talking earlier about kindness, just the, I'm there for you. And I think sometimes we feel quite disempowered, coming back to what you were saying about, I want to make a contribution in the world. When we were having our conversation the other day, I think we got to the point where, the biggest contribution that we can make is cultivating our consciousness and our level of awareness and bringing it up, right? And that can manifest in different ways in the community, in the society, in our families that we live in. But ultimately that is for us to do. That's an inner work, right? It's an inner journey. And from that stems this beautiful creation. And we don't know where it will lead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, yes, trust what wants to come through and recognize that what you are is more important than the specific actions you're doing. What you are is creating your future and is constantly influencing everyone around you and everywhere you go. If you've cultivated an energy of unconditional love, you become, and awareness, you become a clear mirror for everyone around you. You become a healing presence. And ultimately, you can begin to develop this extraordinarily powerful kind of energy field that can just have this ripple effect simply by being organically who you are, which connects to another thing I was going to say, which is that people, often the ego and the mind, you get the download that I need to do more to help the world. And the ego and the mind, like Adam says, can have this really specific idea of what it looks like to help the world. You think, I need to fly over to Tibet and volunteer in an orphanage, or I need to do this other thing that's not really realistic. But go down into the heart, into the intuition, and realize that there is an uncanny way in which the ways you're being called to step more deeply into service actually align with your highest spiritual excitement and with becoming who you truly are. It's really, you're not being called to go be someone totally different, this person you can barely imagine. You're actually just being called to become who you truly are, follow your highest excitement, which will lead to you playing your part well, and then you trust that other people's highest excitement is filling the other gaps. You don't have to be Atlas and shoulder all the pieces. You trust that there's a community of people awakening to their higher purpose and their highest excitement around the world, and you hold your peace, and it can actually be very enjoyable and fun to do that. It's not like, I need to start shouldering this big burden. It's like, no, I need to start doing the thing that I'm going to enjoy most in the world. I need to come alive.
Yes, As I think Gandhi said, be the change you want to be in the world, right?
Actually, that's commonly misattributed to
Who is it, Jordan?
Who was it? Yeah, I'm sure
Alfred
you know.
Campbell?
I don't know. I think it's author.
So the quote commonly misattributed to Gandhi was, be the change you want to be in the world. No matter who said it, it's still very valid.
Be the glitch you want to see in the Matrix. Is
Yeah.
my favorite variation.
The more you live your light, the more that light is going to be spread to other people. The more you're going to pull them on the path. And there is a tendency sometimes, because I've experienced this myself, after very intense experience, is to proselytize. To go out and say, I got to tell everybody needs to do ayahuasca, everybody should do mushrooms, everybody should do this. And it can sometimes have the opposite effect. Yeah. By integrating it into yourself and just becoming that which the experience was telling you should be, and living to your highest purpose and becoming that light and living that light, people will see it in you. They will see the change in you, and they will start to ask questions. Hey, what's up with you, man?
What happened in Costa Rica?
What happened in Costa Rica? Exactly. Suddenly you're smiling and you're nice. You're not a jerk anymore, or whatever, And this is how we can change the people around us. It starts with the people around us first, our friends and our family, and that will then create this ripple effect as it goes out. And the biggest thing we can do is to embody love, and to embody kindness, as we've talked a lot about, and be in that heart space. And this is one thing that psychedelics often do, is bring us back into the heart space. So live that light, and like moths to the flame, they will come.
You can envision these expanding circles. You heal self, then you heal household, then you heal community, then you heal culture, then you heal planet.
Yeah.
It ripples outward from there.
Yeah, again, this lesson comes up over and over. You just have to live it. You just have to live whatever lesson it is. Articulation is like grasping at smoke. You just have to do it. I forgot what I was
Yeah,
going to say.
well, I was going to just carry on. It's like, show me, don't tell me. Because we are very much a society that does
Walk
this.
the
Like
talk.
a lot of talking, a lot of information, a lot of, I promise I'll do this better, or I'll change, or I'll, the most powerful transmission really is I'm doing it and I'm being it above anything else, and people will notice, and people will be like, hey, even if they don't say it to you, I'll be like, something's different, right? Something's changed, something's shifted. And 9 times out of 10 they'll be like, something shifted in that person and I want some of that, right? How do I cultivate more of that in myself? And then that creates an opening in the conversation to be like, hey, you kind of haven't seen you for a few months, and what have you been doing, right? And then there's an invitation, rather than, as you say, some people can maybe go into this evangelical phase of everybody needs to know about this new thing, right? Whatever the new thing is, right? Rather than having this kind of invitation into a conversation of, hey, what's up? What changed? Like, you're different. You're way cooler than you were before. Every time I see you, obviously. But, then there's a curiosity, then there's a space that opens to then have a different conversation, right? And likewise, when you go back into your community or your family, having this clearer idea and sense around your boundaries, for example, right? And just to say, touching back on, we go back into a space which might be a bit uncomfortable, right? Is we might recognize that our values have become more apparent and clearer to us. The values that we want to live by, right? And I don't necessarily mean these kind of grandiose like concepts of words, but really how we want to show up in our life and how we want to be with people and the things that we want to be doing with our time, right? Because that's often how values show up. It's not necessarily in, aligning fully with love or aligning fully with, equality, for example. But it shows up in our daily life, what's important to us. And you may get more clarity on what's really now more important to you. And that means that you may have to create some boundaries, right? And I think many of us, the way that we've been brought up, I speak for myself included, we have this difficulty with boundaries in interpersonal relationships, right? And often in integration, these can be brought to a head, and sometimes it's therefore necessary to address them head on, right? And so actually this is no longer acceptable in my life, or this is no longer acceptable in our relationship. So doing it in a way that's loving, but it's also about clear about what you stand for and what you need, are sometimes the pleasant or sometimes the challenging conversations that flow from this type of experience. And whether that's, you know, a psychedelic experience, or whether that's, you know, just a very intense experience that you've had. It could be a near-death experience, for example, that causes you to reevaluate your life, right, and how you're living and what you really stand for and what you really want. So I think it's important to to make those changes if they feel indicated.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up boundary setting, because I think boundary setting is one of the most fundamental yet undervalued and underdiscussed adult life skills. I can't believe I never heard anything about boundary setting until I learned about it on the internet. And it's really, I think of boundary setting as just being deeply about self-love and self-respect, and developing this deep sense of what you deserve and what you don't deserve. And this can be an integration practice, actually. Often in these experiences we can have a lot of shadow, repressed kind of rage or anger come up for us, and we can release some of that, and then you can actually reintegrate some of that powerful energy as assertiveness, and actually growing some claws and being able to actually stand up and say to someone, you know what, I'm not okay with this anymore. I'm not okay with you subtly being condescending to me. I'm not okay with you subtly trying to cut me down and do these things. I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. So either our dynamic needs to change, or I'm going to take some space from you. Things like that can be really valuable. And I kind of want to shift gears a little bit in the conversation and see if we have any more particular advice on very practical practices that people might use in their integration process. One that I really wanted to mention was the letting go technique. There's this book called Letting Go, The Pathway of Surrender by David Hawkins. And the letting go technique is very simple. It's basically just allowing and not suppressing or denying anything that we're feeling. Anything that comes up, any feeling you're having, you know that it's completely okay. Every emotion is okay. There's no emotion that is not okay to have. Anything that comes up, you allow it. You allow it to be exactly what it is without trying to change or modify it. You attempt to feel it fully, and as soon as you surrender to it and you just say, there is fear, there is anger, I'm going to feel this, and allow it, and you just surrender to it, it immediately begins to transmute the emotion into a lesser emotion, and it begins to deplete the energetic or emotional reservoir behind the emotion. And then you can actually let go of this emotional baggage you've been carrying for a while, and you can begin to process your emotions in real time rather than stuffing them away as we emotionally constipated Westerners tend to do. Because when you stuff them away, they don't go away, they just fester within you and gradually become this like gloppy stew of gross resentment and sticky grief that you never want to touch or look at, and then it eventually erupts out of you at the family Thanksgiving or something, and there's an ugly display, you know? So you can begin to actually process your emotions and release them in real time, and you release these blockages. A lot of these more base emotions are what are blocking our deeper bliss and joy and love and these higher states that can begin to come through once the kind of dark clouds are cleared from in front of the sun. So that's the letting go technique.
Yeah, awesome. I would add a couple of things on that. The theme of emotional integration, which for me, working with breath, is probably one of the most powerful areas that we can really help ourselves, because as you say, being emotionally constipated doesn't help us, and it doesn't help the world, because we become disconnected, disembodied, disengaged, because we're not physically in touch with our reality, right? We're living in our head. So finding a space where you're able to be with your emotions, even if that's just you with your emotions, is really, really powerful. And that's often, you know, what comes from the retreats sometimes, is people having a space to be able to be with how they're feeling right now. Right, just to be with whatever's going on, whether it's joy, whether it's sadness, whether it's pain, whether it's laughter, you know, whatever is there is welcome. And I think cultivating that in your own environment back home is really, really important. So that could be with the letting go technique, that could be with the breathwork practice, you know, a connected breathwork practice such as I practice, which is really an emotional integration, right? Again, along similar lines of just being with whatever is in the moment, And the more we can feel it and be with it, the faster it's actually going to move and integrate in our system, right? And we then have more capacity. And what I just want to say about emotion is that for me, this is a navigation system. You know, we have this spectrum of emotions, and where we cut off or disengage with any perhaps denser or what society might consider negative emotion, we also cut off our capacity for lighter emotions. So we cut off maybe shame and guilt and fear and other things, right? Because we don't want to feel those. But then we cut off the joy and the peace and the happiness and can operate in this kind of band in the middle of like, okay, numb. And that's where I was for many, many years. So when we give ourselves this space, we can broaden that capacity, and then that can just help us navigate the world, right? Doesn't mean we have to get sucked into our emotions. And if anything, an emotion generally lasts, 15 to 30 seconds when we're really, really in it. So just allowing it to be there can kind of puff away this kind of like cloud that might have been hanging over us. And as Jordan's saying, this cloud might have been building up for years, right? We might have been stoking the fire. And there's a really nice book, which is a guided 10-week journey, which is a breathwork related practice. And it's a book called The Presence Process by Michael Brown. And this really it's a present moment awareness practice with a breathwork integration. And he talks you through a journey of identifying emotions, identifying the messengers that are bringing these things to you in life, and then how to resolve them. So that's another way. It's similar to the letting go technique, but he talks about the pain body almost. This very globulous, uncomfortable, emotional locker that we are carrying with us, almost like the backpack. And I know you use the analogy sometimes of one of our first journeys where we're walking along the path and we have these rocks and we pick up the rocks and they go in the backpack, and the message really was that these weren't yours to begin with. You pick up the rock and you look at the rock and then you put it back down and you carry on your path.
Learn the lesson.
Yeah, so the letting go technique and all of these other things are really a way of unburdening the rucksack, taking some things out and putting them down and recognizing that they served a purpose, but we no longer need them. And another one just on an acceptance front, acceptance of forgiveness, I think are really personal, really powerful practices to allow us to let go, right? Because if we can't accept something, we can't really change it, because we're fighting that thing, we're in resistance about it even being there. And something like the Ho'oponopono, which is a Hawaiian mantra, it can be really, really powerful. I won't go into that here, but if Google Ho'oponopono, you'll find, and this was a mantra that was, from what I understand, used by a psychologist in a hospital.
I think it was a prison, right?
It was a prison?
Prison, yeah.
But he found this radical shift in people's perception from using it. And it's really allowing whatever there is there to be, and loving it and accepting it and saying thank you and letting it go. It's like the poison that we drink expecting somebody else to die, right? It's kind of like resentment, we can give that to ourselves if we can give that forgiveness, whether to ourselves for something that we've done, right? Or something that somebody else has done, it sets us free, takes the shackles off. We don't have to be, I like to say, beating ourselves over the head with a frying pan for the past. Even energetically, we can let that go and say thank you. Really appreciate that this came into my life, because now I see the blessing, I see the lesson. What is the gift? Even though this is challenging, what is the gift that's presented to me to learn from? Thank you very much, and now I can let it go. And that really distinguishes us from now and from the past.
I think one of the most easiest practices, if we want to talk practicality, which I think is important to keep things basic also, that combines a lot of these different things we've been talking about, is to simply sit and use the mantra, let go. You inhale, and in your mind you think let, and when you exhale, you say go. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of more complex things out there, but this is one of the most easiest practices I've learned, and every single person can do that. It combines the breath, it combines mindfulness, it combines a mantra, which can be very powerful. Just let go. Something else that I find is a very good practice is to take workshops, to take spiritual workshops. They can be anything from, conscious touch or conscious relating, or even into tantra and things like this. Anything that is going to get you in touch with these, higher practices is going to keep you in that space somehow. One of the most powerful things, I think, is doing inner child work.
Mm-hmm.
The basis of almost every single issue that we tend to have comes from our childhood. And I've done quite a bit of inner child work on myself, and I've assisted a lot, and I'm co-facilitating inner child work. And it's something that I think every single person should do. So things like the Hoffman process or primal therapy, these are all excellent resources and therapy types that can go down and help heal the inner child, which is where so many of these issues stem from. So I would encourage everybody to, at some point in their life, look into healing and at least connecting with your inner child and giving them the love and the care that they really need.
Yeah, and along that line of staying with processes, developing rituals. Ritual is an important distinction, right? It's not a goal, it's not a habit, it's not a want. Like in ceremony, we have these sacred practices, these rituals. We use them to open ceremony, you have a way to conduct yourself during ceremony, and we have a way to close it, right? Life itself is a ceremony, right? And each day you get a new ceremony. You should have a way to start it, you should have a way to conduct yourself, and you should have a way to close it. So you get resolution, you get processing space, and you get a way to, set up the state that you're going to be in for your ceremony, for your life.
It's also worth mentioning that there are many therapists out there nowadays who have knowledge of psychedelic experiences and psychedelic integration. And beyond therapists, there are also a lot of coaches that you can work with one-on-one online. For instance, after Apotheosis retreats, we offer people an integration experience that consists of a mastermind where it's like video group sharing circles week after week, so people can continue to connect with the tribe and learn from each other's successes and setbacks. And the other component is one-on-one coaching, where you work with one of us facilitators to continue to talk through what happened and talk through your ongoing process, and just be able to ventilate and receive feedback and just gain deeper self-awareness and deeper accountability through that process. And so there's a taboo around working one-on-one with a therapist or a coach in our culture, but that taboo is rapidly dissolving. It's utterly silly, because a good therapist or a good coach can be an absolute gift from above. We all need mentors, we all need mirrors, so that's something really worth keeping in mind. Another practice that is very simple is a simple clearing meditation, and this can be great to do in a cold shower, for instance, which is also a great grounding practice. If you feel kind of ungrounded or a bit all over the place, take a cold shower. And a clearing meditation can consist of something as simple as taking a firm stance and kind of imagining roots going down into the earth from your feet, and imagine you're almost immovable, you're like a mountain. And as you inhale, you feel this energy coming up from the earth through these roots, through your feet. Maybe you visualize it as a blue rippling energy, and it courses through your body, and it gathers in your crown chakra at the top of your head, and it fills your body. And then that's on the inhale, and on the exhale, you can visualize a beam of white or golden light coming down from the cosmos through your crown chakra, through the top of your head, and going through your entire body, and just clearing your entire energetic emotional system with the intention of purification and the intention of, I'm going to let go of whatever is not serving me right now. So you can visualize whatever is not serving you just soaring away on the wind as you do this out breath. And I find that to be a really useful practice, coming off of something like an ayahuasca experience, where you're going to be ripped open, and you're probably going to be taking on things that aren't yours. You absorb the energies and emotions of people around you, and you need practices like cold shower, clearing meditation to get rid of these energies. You can also work with something like mapacho, this cleaner kind of sacred jungle tobacco. You can use this for grounding and clearing. Sage, Palo Santo, things like this. And just two other books that I think are worth mentioning are, When Things Fall Apart by Pema Chodron is an amazing book. It's called Hard Advice for Difficult Times. That's the subtitle. And The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. I think both of those are exceptional books to read after a psychedelic experience.
Yeah, and just to expand on that, in addition to kind of protecting your energy, whether energetically or with intention, the greatest power is nature, right? So being out in nature, even if you live in a big city, you know, finding a park, finding your nearest, I would say, sanctuary with green space where you can also take your shoes off, right, and connect your feet with the earth. And this is something that's becoming increasingly important for me personally, is actually getting my feet on the earth, because we have an electric charge, right? So does the earth. And also with the technology that we have, all of this electricity around us is interfering with our electromagnetic field, right? So often we become supercharged because we wear rubber-soled shoes. Our feet very often don't touch the earth for long periods of time. I mean, we're lucky who are in the jungle and we've been walking around bare feet. But most of the time in cities we have concrete, we have gravel, we have no access to the physical ground, you know, Terra, Mother Earth. And this is, you know, ultimately where we come from. That if you think of it, and where we return to, and so if you think of it as really being this capacitor to generate our energy, so we can actually bring good energy up from the ground. So if you work with a practice like Tai Chi or Qigong, these can be really powerful to bring energy from the source into your body, right? But at the same time, our feet on the earth, our body has an intelligence, right? When we put our feet on the earth, it's almost like we know where we are. Our body, even if rationally we're here, our body knows where it is in space and time. And it's almost discharging anything that we don't need. And you can also do that, just standing on the earth, you know, releasing, asking with intention to release anything that's not yours, to release anything that you don't need. And just spending time in nature can be, and away from phones and all of these electronic gadgets, be really mindful. I think it's one of your quotes, but it's like your attention is your most valuable resource.
Another psychic connection. I was going to mention that at the end of this conversation.
Right, in that, you know, where do you spend your time and attention? Where do you put your focus? And do you do it mindfully or mindlessly? And for me, I know that can go, you know, scrolling on social media, and maybe half an hour or even an hour can go by and I'm like, what have I done? You know, where did I go? Because I wasn't really here with my body. I was here with this thing, right? And all of a sudden I've lost this time where I could have actually been cultivating something really positive. And don't get me wrong, social media and the internet and these ways of connecting with beautiful humans on earth are amazing resources. But we also need to be mindful in the ways in which we engage with them, because we will otherwise get sucked in, right?
And this is a very good point that you bring up, which is extremely important, is digital disconnection. We are inundated by electronic devices, by computers, by phones, by all these different things, which often is what creates this overcharged thing in our bodies. It has an effect on our bodies and our minds, and the information that we feed to ourselves, right? So speaking from experience, I'm a news junkie. I have been in the past, and I have constantly been absorbing, you know, I studied political science, and so I've always been in this place, and I was taking every opportunity to check the news, and even when I'm on the toilet or whatever, I'm checking the news. TMI maybe, but it became, and it was actually, one of you guys who really made me aware of this, and the information that we feed into our mind from the outside, especially when it comes to news or social media or whatever, has a very deep impact on us and our personal development. So choose the information that you want to consume very carefully. One of the best things I ever did, and it was during this retreat, was I deleted all of my news apps, and I said, I'm going to do this just for a week and see what happens. And it feels amazing. I'm not going to change that. I'm going to leave them off, right? But this can be a mindfulness practice in itself, is taking a digital holiday. And I try to do this sometimes, where just for one day, try to leave your phone off, Don't check your computer, don't check your emails, don't check anything, or take an entire weekend and just see what happens. Challenge yourself to do that. And it's a beautiful practice, and I think it can become a habit where you can at least reduce it over time.
Just something really straightforward I want to bring up, because it's been lurking under the surface, but just to make it really explicit, is create a mindfulness practice. And I would just go straight to like make a meditation practice for yourself, because it encompasses so many things that have come up here. It's embodied, it's time for yourself, it focuses attention, it lets you manage and clear energy. Like it's almost, it can be a very strong first domino that just puts everything in place, and like it really can't be underscored enough.
And just to follow on from that is, if you don't feel comfortable just sitting, right, because there are all kinds of different practices, and some of them are just cross your legs, sit, right? There are many apps out there with guided meditations, with guided visualizations that can help you get started, right? Even if it's 5 minutes, 2 minutes a day, whatever it is, that can create a window that then starts to expand. And, you know, do something that's enjoyable, that you're engaged with. You don't have to feel like you're sitting and, oh God, it's meditation time, you know, because you're not going to do it. But those kind of practices, you know, there are many apps out there, and they're not going to cost you, you know, maybe a couple of bucks to get something really, really valuable. And some of them are free, you know, and it will give you a reminder. It'll be like, hey, time for meditation, woohoo, ding. And you'll be like, yeah.
I think we're reaching a good place to start wrapping up this conversation. 2 points that I want to reiterate that have come up. One is that we just gave you an enormous smorgasbord of ideas and practices, and do not feel like tomorrow you suddenly need to integrate these 10 different practices. You know, it's, as we said earlier, it's really like listen deeply to yourself, feel into yourself, see what resonates with you, let go of what doesn't resonate, begin to take small steps in the direction of what you feel called to explore and what feels like it's going to be useful for you, and let it build from there. You know, this podcast is really a treasure trove of wisdom we just shared, and I'm sure if you revisited it, you know, every few months you could keep gleaning new things and new ideas to continue your integration practice. So don't feel like you need to, you know, embody all of this tomorrow. Just let it saturate, let it marinate, and see what wants to emerge slowly, and be gentle with yourself. And the other thing I do need to just reiterate once more, that your attention truly is your most valuable resource, and it's more important now than ever, because it always has been this way, but this is arguably the time in human history where it's most difficult to really focus on the things that matter, because we are living in a world of supernormal stimuli everywhere. Basically, cell phone screens and laptop screens and smart TVs and video game consoles and VR porn and online casinos and super bioengineered cannabis and all these crazy things that are just better at hooking your attention and addicting you than anything ever has been in human history. This is some seriously sci-fi shit that we're in, and there's all these forces. Unfortunately, your attention is now someone else's paycheck, and so it's many people's job to literally try to engineer a better mousetrap for your attention. And so you really, really need to, I mean, you know, you don't have to do anything, but if you want to free yourself from this trap, you have to begin cultivating this katana-esque attention that is capable of slicing through the bullshit and really waking up in the morning and setting an intention of what are the 2 or 3 big things that I want to do today that will make today feel like it was aligned and it was complete and it was building toward my path and my purpose. And if you start making a practice of that and just start cultivating this awareness around wherever your attention is going, this more expansive awareness and witnessing the monkey mind get drawn into the advertisement or get drawn into, you know, the movie screen or whatever it is, just that attention will begin to reshape the way you use your attention. You'll begin to see, wow, I didn't realize I was this distracted, and I didn't realize that my ADHD, anxiety-laden consciousness was a product of living in the 21st century and being so inundated by all these supernormal stimuli. So, yeah.
A couple of things I want to add on to that. Staying anchored in yourself, as Jordan is saying, in this crazy, overstimulated world is really, really challenging, and just being aware of that is a great first step. And acknowledging that we're human and that we will oscillate between states before we find our set point, right? Before we find the balance, can give us a break, right? You don't need to go out and implement all of these tools in one go. In fact, you know, if one thing has resonated during this whole podcast, go with that. You know, test it out, get curious, and see what that brings you. Because the last thing integration should be is overwhelming, right? We do a good job of beating ourselves up enough without loading the plate even more to give us ourselves another reason to continue to beat ourselves up. So find the thing that just really sparked a yes in you and follow that path. And what I would say is, you know, this is for me the expansion that we're going through right now, the expansion of consciousness, the raising of awareness, it's a battle of attention, right? And reclaiming our sovereignty. And this was a conversation we were having the other night, Jordan, about being each individually sovereign beings, and that it's up to all of us individually to navigate our own path, right? But that we are all equals and we all hold equal responsibility in the world, and particularly we hold responsibility to ourselves, right, to manifest our highest vision. And that doesn't have to be a huge, great status or physical creation in the world, right? It can just be owning our energy, owning our sovereignty, and owning our boundaries, owning our emotions, owning our shit, basically, right? But also being clear that actually this is what I need, right? And really sitting in our power. And for me, sovereignty is just really about understanding that we have our own power. Nobody can take that away from us. But with that power comes responsibility, right? And it's our responsibility to wield that power sensibly, and with love and care, but ultimately to really guard our consciousness, right? And cut away, as you say, anything that's not in the higher service of truth. And so that we don't get distracted. And that's my invitation really, is just to, the more we can align, center, and keep coming back to that, you know, that in itself has a ripple effect. So don't feel you all have to do it all at once, you know. It's just like, just remember to keep coming back and back and back. And I really like the daily intention setting, you know, how am I going to show up today? How am I going to show up today? How am I going to show up today? And just that prompt is enough.
One thing I would leave people with is being versus becoming. It's so easy to get all these downloads and be like, look at the person I could be. I hate who I am now. They're not mutually exclusive ideas. You can deeply embrace the person you are now and want to be more and expect more from yourself at the same time, right? Those are both part of you, and it's very easy to be like, damn, I don't like who I am right now, right? And come from this place of almost fear or hate instead of love. And, you know, once you can see all your potential, the sphere of who you're not grows, and you may not see the progress in yourself. Like in relative size, your awesomeness shrinks, but in absolute size, you're still growing, you're still blossoming. So always coming back to that place of, oh, I love myself, and what else can I do? Instead of from this place of fear or dislike or distrust.
And I like what Yuvi Ivanova has said about being and becoming, being part of the same multi-dimensional object. So the multi-dimensional object of who you are, they're not at odds. Being who you are and becoming something else it's what we are evolutionary beings. Everything on this earth is growing and changing, and you are constantly growing and changing without even trying to. And so when you begin to just focus on what am I being right now, and clearing your awareness and coming into gratitude and coming into love, you can't help but continue becoming as well, and simply focusing on that being is going to direct the direction of your becoming in an organically beautiful, upward spiraling way. So you don't need to be like, oh, I see what I need to become, I need to force this, I need to dig my toes in and force this. It will just occur organically, akin to a flower blossoming, when you just narrow your focus to the wise things, the wise path, and slice away the bullshit. And another thing I wanted to say about sovereignty was, if you want to think more about sovereignty, Jordan Hall, previously known as Jordan Greenhall, is a great resource. He's amazing. His framework for sovereignty is that there are three main aspects: clear perception, clear awareness, kind of coming into this centered, very grounded, very focused place where you're intaking data in a really high resolution, highly sensitive way with multiple systems of intelligence, embodied awareness. So it's making it's clear perception, and then it's making sense of what you're intaking. And so this involves having some scaffolding and some frameworks and tools to actually take the data of your experience and continue to put it into structures and narratives that allow you to make sense of your life and your reality. And then the third aspect, clear perception, making sense, and then skillful action on the basis of the sense making. You perceive clearly, you make sense of what you perceive, and then you actually put it into practice and you start acting from this place of the clear perception and the sense making, and then it becomes that embodied action, and you just begin to flow in this place of sovereignty. And I think meditation may well be the number one practice for cultivating sovereignty.
Yeah.
And as well, I mentioned Yuvi Ivanova. She's one of the future thinkers. Her and Mike Gilliland, her husband, are they create the Future Thinkers podcast, and they have a course called A Course in Personal Evolution, which is all about cultivating sovereignty and integrating the shadow, which are two enormously important things to do for integration. So I can highly recommend their course, having taken it. That's a great course to look into.
Yeah.
And a note that I thought might be worth ending on, I know, Adam, you mentioned that you wanted to talk a bit about the 4 components of integration: mind, body, spirit, social. Is there anything more you can add to illuminate a little more kind of how you think about that framework for integration and those 4 areas?
Well, I think we covered almost everything.
Okay.
And to be honest, I think at some point you got to stop talking and start walking. And I think we reached that point.
Okay.
And I'll leave it with that.
Beautiful. Sounds good. Well, I've truly enjoyed this conversation. Thank you guys for joining. Yeah, it's been an unbelievable week. I love all of you. So.
Carl, we can talk a lot of shit.